which areas of your operation present the most significant opportunity? Okay, here's some specifics. Total dealership profitability. You'll see we break this down between domestic, volume imports, and highlines. So this is net to gross before owner salaries and taxes. Now remember I just said that 30% net to gross is what people are shooting for. And most people around benchmark are hovering in the high 20s and close to 30%. Would you agree with that, Chris? Mm-hmm. And then there's some people who are actually 35 plus, and it's a rare market opportunity. So group average, which is just average, look where we are in relation to that 30%. Okay, now this is total dealership. Okay, all the combined departments. In a benchmark, the 75th percentile, the domestics are very close. So these dealerships who are at benchmark. So the whole point is, if I know what a target is, that's the point of benchmarks, then we can start moving towards that. So profit on sales, and this would be net to sales. So when Group 1 or Sonic or Asbury or AutoNation or Penske, when they talk about how they did, this is what Wall Street wants to know. What was your net to sales? And you can see, so actually 4.5 net to sales equates to the same thing as 30% net to gross. You can see, so the benchmark for all these people are getting very, very close. And the high lines, as you see in the netted, they just have more opportunity. Not only do they have more gross in their cars, they're going to have a higher hours per hour on the service drive, but we're not talking about expenses. So they also have higher expenses. They have less volume, but they've got more gross per car. So how do your numbers compare? This is something we go through with each class. Even if it's a service management class or a used car manager class, we want them to start taking ownership of numbers. Because when people start doing math on their own numbers, then we start talking about people and processes. It's a lot easier for them to start making culture change, whether it's the dealer principal themselves, general manager, or departmental. Because if there's a lot of opportunities, do we all agree a whole lot of change is going to happen? Any questions so far? I know I'm going fast. Yeah, Chris.
I do. Do you personally prefer to look at net to gross or profit?
Do we?
Do you personally? What do you prefer when you look at a number? Is the first number you're looking at is it net to gross or is it profit?
You mean as opposed to net to sales?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Because what we call, it's a great question, what we call gross is a spendable dollars. You know, what Wall Street wants to see is for very different reasons, but we know we can't spend sales. You know, we might say, well, we did 50 million in sales last month. But there's people who do 50 million sales and lose their ass. Yeah. Okay, so, and we'll get into that part of things.
So the net to gross is what most dealers
absolutely. So gross, we talk on the upside, what are our gross margins? Okay? And again, we mostly speak of that in service and parts because there are bigger margins, but we don't talk about sales. And also when we talk about expenses, all expenses are a percentage of gross, right? They're not as a percentage of sales because we can't spend the sales dollars. You know, if our expenses are in good shape, and if our transactional gross profit is of a high quality, and our inventories are in line, then we have an opportunity to our sales will translate into net to gross. But it probably wouldn't even be helpful, Chris, if we did use it, just because it would end up coming back to where's the gross, okay? Okay, so this is what we think are the 4 key areas to focus on. Personnel productivity, and we'll go into these in depth. Expense control, asset management, both new, pre-owned parts and accounts receivable, and a big one for the fixed operations is fixed coverage. So let's talk about personnel productivity. We analyze the gross profit performance by department and by total dealership. How much gross are you missing and why? Some of the best operators are operating at 60-40 productive to support. That's another thing. We've got pages in 20 Group Composite that breaks down, you know, what a lot of dealers want to see is what was my total gross. You know, my gross per employee. Sometimes $10,000 used to be the benchmark, and we'll see that in a second. And now with the luxury brands, it's much higher than that.
Is that census or payroll? 60-40. Number of people?
No, I'm sorry. That yes. Exactly. And 50-50 used to kind of be the benchmark. We talked about that. And I will tell you, it's still, that's what the norm is. And sometimes you'll see that that can still be a benchmark. But when we get into really high process, if you think about it in better times before we start just shrinking, when I said I ran into a friend that said they cut 30+% 4 years ago. And this is a big luxury dealership. I mean, I don't think they were ever fat and happy, but this was the biggest luxury dealership, multi-brand luxury dealership in Kansas City. And, you can't do that. You can't go from 5 people to 3 or 7 people to 4 unless you almost completely reinvent the wheel with those people, because whether those people did a great job as 7 or 5 or not, if you reduce them, who's going to process map? Who's going to go in and say, okay, now you do exactly what you were supposed to be doing plus this? And you've got to, you can't just whack stuff off. And I think it was either David last night or maybe it was Grant this morning just saying, well, we reduced everything and we, all the players were left standing. Well, I would hope that would be the case, but sometimes we don't necessarily know. This is exactly what David and Grant were talking about and what we talked about at NCM. We cannot manage results. We crunch all these numbers for all our clients, and we get them to look at them. But all we can truly manage, we cannot manage numbers. We can only manage activities. So when you're going back and you're thinking, what's my takeaway from this whole conference? Grant just started this whole thing about people, that all we can do is manage their activities. And that comes with processes, and you have to, it sounds good, we use it, systemic structure, we use that word. Systemic structure, what's so cool about high process organization is that, you can have dissimilar people, but if you have a high process environment, and they will see the why in it. And establishing minimal acceptable standards. We sometimes just create a pay plan for somebody and just say, this is it. And sometimes we'll show people we can have an A, B, C, or D pay plan, and maybe the C is just an average performance. And let them know, what's expected. We don't take full advantage of that. We focus a lot on, not just having a organizational chart, not just having job descriptions, but job objectives. And we don't have a lot of time to get into that, but that's what that means. Vehicle sales, marketing, and traffic management. Wow, it was so inspirational listening to David's story last night. But we break down, we call them opportunities to do business. And primarily, they're salespeople generated appointments, walk-in traffic, phone-in traffic, and internet traffic. And that's the way we really break those down, even though we call them a little bit different things. Are we managing those opportunities, in 4 different ways? They have different closing ratios. They show up at different places in the funnel. There's a big study that was just done on walk-in traffic. And like Grant just said, well, why are people afraid of the CRM tool? Because they don't know what they're supposed to do with it. They're just told to put the input in. What do we do with the output? So personnel productivity, here's a benchmark we use for total gross, new and used sales. Okay, so this would be combined. I know most of you wouldn't have a combined sales force, but 28,000, 29, and 45,000, you can see the huge difference that goes on in the Highline stores. And the gross per manager is a big deal. We've got a, Chris, where are we on time for this? Are we for like an hour? 45 minutes?
I think about 45 minutes now.
Okay, so we got time. So there's a lot of ratios we deal with. How many, David talked about, made a joke of it, but when we're all laughing and crying at the same time, it's still 8 to 10, sales per car salesperson. And, our gross is going up? No. So, and I got a client who really is on top of their metrics. And they sell about 170 new and used a month. It's a Toyota store. He always forecasts 240. And we were in a session, and he goes, I'm always missing my forecast. I go, how many cars do your people average per month? He goes, 9.6. Didn't say 9, didn't say 10. They're so on top of their metrics, he said 9.6. And I said, and how many cars you're averaging? He said 170. I said, how many salespeople you got? He goes, 17. And you're forecasting 240 a month. I said, and you're wondering why, and by the way, he's advertising for 240. He's stocking for 240, but he wasn't staffing for 240. So it just seemed like, yes, sir.
In your gross per manager there, is the back end included in that as well?
This is, yeah, in fact, these numbers reflect ads, deducts, all rolled back. That's a great question. We use like 4 different levels of gross. There's front-end gross, there's front-end gross plus F&I, there's front-end gross plus, then you've got hard packs, dock fees, and then there's so many manufacturers like Chevrolet right now. I mean, I know Chevrolet dealers that basically will give away their cars on the front end, but they're so process driven, they get all that money in the programs, and so we roll that back in. So like in our world, you look at a 20 group composite, it looks like somebody has $749 gross, but when you look down, 19 lines down, ads and deducts might be, you know, $340,000. So we're trying to, and more manufacturers are doing that. As you all know, they're shrinking the front end margins and putting more money in the back end. So in order to do that right, yes, we rolled all that money back up. Any other questions on that? I know I'm going really fast. So the other thing is, you know, how many salespeople do we have in relation to forecast? It's crazy how many people will forecast, you know, a bigger number than they ever get. And one of the reasons they'll find out they just don't have the physical salespeople. That doesn't even speak to how well the salespeople are. But sometimes, and I know from my own experience, like if I think it's going to be a headache rather than an opportunity to bring on a new salesperson, then I just won't. And the fact is, you know, and we may need to sell that 240 in a particular dealership to actually make the return on investment we want. And we still sometimes, you know, 17 salespeople in a single point store is not an insignificant amount of salespeople. But in this place, they needed 24. So the gross per manager, you know, that's almost, you know, there's a metric and a ratio of, okay, well, how many salespeople should you, or how many sales managers should you have for salespeople? We use a ratio, you should have, you know, one manager for every 5 salespeople. That's in a different presentation. So personnel productivity as it pertains to service and parts. Anybody particularly focused in this room on service and parts? Okay. Well, what we sell, what we talk about, what are we selling in our fixed operations? We're selling labor, but we're selling labor time, right? So all we're really selling is time. So we're talking about hours billed. And the ingredients to that is shop capacity. Does anybody know a dealership that might have 23 stalls and 11 techs? Okay, so when we get real with our service managers or our general manager, we start talking about math and time. We say, we don't even talk about personnel yet. We say, well, how many stalls do you have? I have 22. Okay, and how many hours are you open per day? And how many days per week are you open on Saturdays? How many hours? So we do the math on if you have, that's how many hours you have available to sell productivity-wise. And it kind of puts an interesting vibe in the room going on. They say, well, how many technicians do you have? They go, 11. How many did you have this time last year? 13. How many did you have 3 years ago? 18. And that gets into a whole discussion of what we're talking about. So we need to take opportunity of, you know, not only do we need to find out how we start turning around or retaining a larger percentage of our own, you know, customer base. So then we get into personnel capacity. You know, why do we have 11 techs? Anybody imagine why we have 11 techs?
Well, that's all said they need 2 stalls each, and there were reports.
Exactly. So what we would recommend is the best is a 1-to-1 ratio, but that's easier said than done. You know, your work, you know, if you've been shrinking per year, then that's a reason. One of the reasons. I know in our own, you know, in our dealership in Kansas City, when we were the biggest Oldsmobile dealership, when there was such a thing, we had that same scenario. And we had one stall per tech, and then over a period of years, as Oldsmobile was shrinking before I got a Chevrolet dealership to put in there, you know, I saw the same thing happen. Lines per RO. We hear about hours per RO. What do you think lines per RO means?
How many one-line tickets you?
Exactly. Thank you. The other thing is, we know what the average miles of a car is. We ask service managers, do you know what the average mile of the cars coming through your shop is? And they'll say, a lot of them will know, and they'll say it's in the 60,000 mile range. And we'll say, okay, well, we don't even talk about what percentage of those people, but they say it's the average. I said, can you imagine the 60,000 mile car really ending up being a one-line repair order? So that's something, it needs stuff. So that's personnel productivity. So we start looking at metrics that way. Hours per line. Not just how many lines are in there, but what are the hours? What are we selling? What does this car need? Effective labor rate. Does everybody know what effective labor rate?
Yes.
Okay. Our door rate or our target rate, in a lot of states now we don't have to post it, but we used to have to post what our labor rate is. And everybody will say, well, our labor rate is $100, let's just say for round numbers, it's $100 an hour. But our effective labor rate is really what we're getting paid. Because not everybody's averaging $100. So we might have our customer pay mix up there at the highest, warranty and extended service agreement at the lowest, and then our internal. So what we end up saying our effective labor rate is, well, what we say is good is an effective labor rate is 90%. So if we had a $100 target rate, let's just say, and you had a $90 effective labor rate, we would say that's good. And we do that in class. We find out, we show people how to calculate their effective labor rate, because again, going to the benchmarks, we got to know where we are before we can find out where we move forward. And it's an eye-opener for most people. They can tell you what their effective labor rate is, but they have no idea where it comes from or why. And the fact is, it breaks down in these, and there's even sub-accounts within those. Even in the customer paid labor, we've got competitive work, we've got the maintenance work, and then we've got repair work. So we actually have 3 different labor rates within that. So we show people how to, how to break that apart, find out what it is, make sure we understand how to move forward on that. Warranty, who sets that rate?
Manufacturer.
And who sets the rate on the extended service contracts? So, exactly. So internal and new vehicle labor, what's interesting is we talk about in our groups, we should always be charging used car department, the same as we do our door rate. Does that mean we're almost wrapping up?
Yeah, whenever you get done.
Okay. We preach, I know in our 20 groups, that a dealership should be charging themselves. Remember, it's a dealer's opportunity. The same thing for used car reconditioning retail rates. And often we find that there's a big opportunity there because somehow that isn't the same. And this is one of the biggest deals that we have. The number of new customers per service advisor, and Toyota calls it assistant service managers. The amount of new customers a service advisor talks to per day is one of the biggest deals that affects not just profitability, but our customer retention. And typically our pay plans are geared towards guys and gals that can write the largest amount of repair orders. And we actually, we have things we call key performance indicators. And I've got a Toyota dealership friend who is actually, believe it or not, any of you are familiar with service, that their sweet spot is between 9 and 11 new customers per day.
You don't mean new customers to the dealership, you mean new ROs.
New ROs, yeah, new customer ROs. And what you'll have is, most guys will be doing 18, 20, 30. The pay plans are based that way. We'll look at the service department is broken. The margins are broken, the expenses are broken. The only way these guys and gals can make any money is just by, being order takers, and we find out that nothing works at that point. And this does not happen overnight because, we'll have people go, well, there's just no way. They'll do the gross calculations on stuff, but I don't have the time to spend on it, but we literally will spend a few hours on the math, on proving it to people, because to do an awesome job on a per customer basis on the service drive, including following up, status checking during the day, assuming the car, we did it at, multi-point inspection, and we found some things, we need to status check with them, get some permission to buy things, is 40 minutes. We'll do this exercise unannounced with most service managers, and they will say the meet and greet takes this, the walk around takes this, the write-up takes this, you know, the permission to, you know, have the multi-void inspection to do this, and then the callback, you know, progress checking, 40 minutes invariably. So you do 40 minutes times 10, 15, 20 customers, well, the math doesn't work. And that's the point on that, and it's a major culture change for most people.